I would like to welcome you all today to listen to our panel of experts in their chosen field to discuss photography and art. So without further ado, please meet the panel. Brenda Colahan is the academic. Richardson is the collector. Josef Lebovic is the dealer. And last but not least is Tedeschi, the photographer.
When we start thinking about the day-to-day photography and the camera and the use of it, the box brownie around 1900 is what changed the world. Everyone became an instant photographer, or pretended to be, and that's where we all have, I remember when I was growing up, we had a box brownie taking our little snapshots in the 50s and 60s. That was the egalitarian way of everyone being able to be a photographer. But we part company. In the turn of the century, photography became, or considered to be, an art form, is when pictorialist photographers started to emulate the idea that it's not just photography, it's art, and we're trying to make it closer to the work of an artist. And that is the era that, in the latter part of the 19th, early 20th century, that we find that art becomes much more part of what's seen as photography. But there are still other things that happen, which is photojournalism, which is what we document day to day, we see in newspapers. That is always part and then parcel of documenting our life. That becomes more common in newspapers in the early part of the 20th century. So that actually drives and actually keeps employment for photographers, because a lot of photographers in the early part of the 20th century did not make a living from selling photographs. In fact, most of them would have starved if they had to sell a photograph. They made their living from selling the image to a magazine, a publication, or for a commission, not actually selling them on the walls that we have today. In fact, that particular era of selling photography becomes a much more prevalent thing after the Second World War. So what we have as a legacy today is in fact from, I would think, the 1950s and 60s, and that whole era of what we become accustomed to is part of that particular era. The only thing I'm going to end up with now is that, of course, we're now in the digital age. And one of the things we're going to discuss the difference between it, but that in itself has revolutionised today the world and everything about photography.
I think that photography also has the capacity to sometimes capture some things that you cannot capture in other art forms. And the best example I can give you is an example of some images that I took myself. I remember one in particular in Italy. I was with my wife in Italy, and we're in a gallery at an opening of an art exhibition, and I saw this man looking at this young man looking at this beautiful woman, and he was looking at her with a look of longing and lust. But it was more than that. It was a look of I'll never have her. She's way beyond me, and I just managed to capture that instant. Now, to me, anybody can look at that photograph and see the emotions, the mixed emotions there. How can you capture that in any other art form? I don't know that you could. So I think that photography offers an opportunity to capture some emotive subjects that you can't capture with any other art form.
We're actually really good at looking at photographs. It's such a part of our culture. We're very skilled at reading images, and we don't realise it, because we're just bombarded with images around us every day, billboards, television, posters, advertising. We can get right into the meaning in a split second much, much more readily than we can into a painting, where we're sort of looking at how the mark was made, or how the paint was applied, or the brush strokes, or how did they do that? Whereas photography, we're right there in the meaning.
John Caldor, you've probably all heard of. He was the chairman of the MCA and I was the deputy chairman, and we both went to a photographic exhibition with, say, 10 different artists. And John is a very positive and a man with strong views, and he said, no, 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 yes, no, no. And the one he said yes to was the one I liked least. So, and we're both fairly experienced in photography, so it's in the eye of the beholder, and it's in the mind too. So it's what you see and what you look at. And if it touches you, fair enough, that's when I think it's art. If it doesn't, it ain't art.
Those random box brownie shots, those things that we think of that become, you come back and look at things later and say, gee, that's better than I thought. they're disappearing with digital world, because what we have is instant erase button. The memory of saving these things. How many people have got computers? How often do you save things? Photographers are in the same boat. They can be careless, and whole careers of photographers can disappear if they're storing something and they don't save it or properly keep it. With film-based photography, you can put it in the box and forget about it. Come back 20, 30 years later and say, oh, that was pretty good, let's go and do something with them. That's where the energy, I think, is going to be one of the problems we have.
Joseph, there have been lots of negative archives that we've heard about historically that have just been lost to us because somebody has left them up in an attic, and a generation later they've been thrown out, or there's been a house fire and the negatives have been destroyed.
I agree.
Images can be lost digitally. Images can also be lost in their physical form.
I think the survival rate of film-based by choice and by energies, I think the digital world has got a much greater problematic situation coming up, because there is the storage, and it's not like a negative you can put in a box. You have to have the right electronic place to save it and also access it.
I don't think the problem is the storage or transfer or being able to bring up old formats. I think the problem is more that it is so easy to create an image and so easy to store an image that there's such a multiplication of images. Everybody has a computer that's full of images, and most people's images will never be looked at. They'll just sit there and one day they'll be thrown away. I think what's more important is that people who are really serious about keeping their images should have a very good system for storing them and retrieving them, and keep copies either externally in a hard drive or externally on the net somewhere.
I hope you're right, Mark. I just think the artists and the people that I've worked with for many years are not as diligent and not as easy to work with, and saying when they're in particular moods and whatever, that they're going to turn around. If they take a roll of film and they decide to do something with it and forget about it, they'll come back to it. But if they happen to have a disc or whatever, my experience is they're not that good at keeping good records and keeping things away. I just feel the digital age has the most revolutionary thing to photography. It's opened it to everyone and anything to happen. But it's also an era where I think we're losing something, and I think that they should be paralleled. I don't think you should give up film totally.
If you press the watercolour button on Photoshop, it looks very cheap and tacky. It's not going to enhance a photograph. First, you've got to have a good photograph to start off with, and then, as Joseph said, whatever changes you make on Photoshop are going to be very, very minimal changes to make the image a clean image, make an image, perhaps correct any defects that are there, but they're minimal changes, basically. And are they manipulation? Well, paintings are a manipulation as well. It's a manipulation of a 3D reality by a painter into a 2D reality. So all art is manipulation.
Now, I'd like Joseph to make a summary that you might all like to go away with and remember. Just say 5 points, Joseph.
Buy photography, buy photography, buy photography.
From Josef Lebovic.
At the end of the day, if it's something that Mark has said that speaks to you, you understand what it is in some form or another. If you don't, ask the question. And if you don't like it, don't buy it. But thank you for coming along. I really appreciate the panel today. It has been a really fantastic thing. I learned a few things anyway. Thank you.
There we go.